Thank you so much, Zaria, for joining us today. We're so excited to have you and learn about all of your incredible, incredible work. For anyone that doesn't know Zaria, she's a pastel artist creating large-scale drawings of melting glaciers and icebergs to document the climate change. If you haven't seen her work, you definitely have to see it. You're going to be amazed by just what she does and noticing that these are not photographs and they're actual real drawings. So I'd like to start with a question, learning more about you and asking where it all began and how you became an artist and what inspires you to create, which is kind of like a long-winded question, I know, but let's get started.
For hours to answer that. But it really all began in my childhood. I grew up with a mom who was an artist. She was a fine art landscape photographer. And so she was obsessed with going to the far reaches of the earth and just finding the most remote places she could possibly venture to and bringing my sister and I and my father to them. And so from a really early age, I just became inspired and enveloped by these really stunning remote places. And so that just, instilled this very deep love inside of me for them. And when you love something, you want to protect it. And so that's kind of how my work has developed over the years, just depicting these things that I really love and showing them to people in order to get them to fall in love with them as much as I have and want to protect them in the way that I do.
Right. And so what type of message are you trying to get across with all of your artwork? And I'm going to be sharing some of your artwork on the screen so everyone can kind of see the different stuff. But what is the message that you really want to get across to people?
There are a lot of messages, but ultimately I really want to show people the beauty of these places that are at the forefront of climate change. And they are often extremely hard to get to, at least these places that I depict in my drawings, the icy polar landscapes, especially. And so they're not really a part of our normal everyday lives. And so it might not feel like, the issues there are pressing, but they have such an effect on the rest of the planet, and literally all of us, every single person on this planet is affected by our warming climate and melting ice. And so I think I want to offer a moment in time for people to experience these places that are otherwise really difficult to get to. So I want to try and draw them as in as much detail as I remember, in that moment when I was there and saw them myself, and so that viewers can really feel like they've been transported to these places in that moment in time, and again fall in love with them in the way that I have. And so and ideally that will motivate people to want to do something to protect them. Is the ultimate goal.
And so you've traveled to places like Antarctica and Greenland. Is there something about each place that really stands out to you when you're going to draw them? What is different about each place that really stands out?
That's a hard question to answer. I think I'm looking for different things to draw with every different expedition that I take. And so, because as an artist, I always want to learn something. I always want to grow in my own practice and learn how to draw new surfaces and textures. And so it's hard to know kind of like what I'm going for before I take a trip. And so I just, when I'm there, I take lots and lots of photos, and then I come back and work through them to figure out what the next body of work is going to look like. But I would say one of the biggest differences between the poles, between like Greenland and Antarctica, is, Greenland, you have land mass with ice on it, and Antarctica is land around water. So it's like, the Antarctic pole is all water frozen. So both have very different feels. I would say Antarctica feels a little bit more like you're in this like icy kingdom because you're just really fully surrounded by ice. And you have these like huge chunky blocks of ice because the ice will come off from the glacier, and then it will continue over water, sometimes for many, many miles. And so if any of that breaks off, it's just a flat, chunky block that can be the size of several New York City blocks,
Wow.
several buildings. And then the more time they spend in the water, the more they get sculpted by the wind and the waves and turn into these beautiful, stunning sculptures. Whereas in Greenland, you have a lot of glaciers just kind of breaking chunks off right into the water as they come off the land. And so perhaps they become these more beautiful sculptures, maybe a little bit faster. So you can find these bays that are just chock full of nature's sculptures, essentially, like this one here.
Are you using the same colors when you're creating both?
Oh, that's a good question. No, there's usually each body of work has a slightly different tonality, and I work with Unison Color Pastels, a small company in Northern England, to create those subtleties, to really fine tune the colors and to get them as much as like what I saw in the landscape, which is very difficult because ice has these blues like you've never seen before and like you never thought it even existed, and it's quite actually impossible to create in pastel, but we do our best. And so every body of work has a different feel depending on kind of the weather, that was happening when I was there, and the light and how it shifted and what time of year it was, and how the snow or the ice is reflected.
Right. So something I was always interested in is when you're traveling and you're taking photos of all of these different places that you're going to travel, is there something that you look for to take a picture of? Like, is there a certain amount of detail that you really need, or do you like it from above or from right in front, or what kind of pictures are you looking to take?
Yeah, it's all of the above. But like I said, it kind of changes with each expedition that I take because I'm always trying to learn something new with each body of work. So sometimes I don't really know what I'm going for. Typically, actually, with each trip, I'll kind of go for like what I was interested in the last body of work, just because that's my reference point and that's what I know. And I'm like, oh, these textures are good and that light is good. And of course, I've learned over the years certain things that will render really well in pastel. But on top of that, I'm always trying to learn something. And so maybe that's, up until about a year ago, that was kind of chalking my compositions as full as I possibly could with detail, more and more and more. So if you look at my work over the years, from 10, 15 years ago up until my NASA series, which is actually all aerial, it just got more and more and more detailed. And then that NASA series kind of burnt me out as the details were so difficult and took so long. You'll be able to see it in a second.
That's incredible.
And I really loved this, working on the ice from an aerial perspective. It was a totally different viewpoint, that I'd ever seen before. And so much more ice and water was chalked into each composition, which is why it's so much more detailed. I mean, you're looking at like miles of ice here in this image. Whereas, before that, my work was more like a few feet of ice, in front of me on a boat. And so it was just, it was an incredible experience to be able to fly with NASA, first of all, and to talk to all the scientists and learn about what I was looking at, but then also to just see these landscapes from a totally new perspective. And then I just kind of got burnt out because all that detail, it was just so much. So this latest body of work that I just finished, and I have a solo show about to open in Seattle. Well, it's actually kind of soft open now, in Seattle. I just kind of wanted to go back to the basics and just back to like what I knew I loved to do, which just like felt so enjoyable to draw. And for me, that was like bigger chunks of ice, more defined, less detail. And it was just a relief, it was like a nice break. So we'll see what comes next. I don't know.
Well, it's amazing. So I kind of want to talk about the materials that you use. I know you use our Lenox paper, and the pastels you had mentioned is the Unison pastels. So how did you find these materials, and did it take a lot of experimenting? Were you trying a bunch of different papers and a bunch of different pastels to find the perfect match, or how did you end up coming across these materials?
For the paper, I had actually used Lenox way back in college. My senior year in college, I was looking for really large scale. I started working pretty big, just my senior thesis exhibition, and Lenox was the only paper I could find that was like, 6 feet tall and 10 feet wide sheets. And I just developed a love for it. It really worked well. And I kind of switched to other papers after that over the years because I could find, 60-inch, 12-foot long rolls and things like Rising Stonehenge. And there was like a framing paper that I think you guys also sold. So I've tried other kinds and more like watercolor papers that are typically more desired for working with pastel because they have more tooth. But I actually just don't like that myself personally. So I kind of veer in the opposite direction of what most pastel artists would typically want with the Lenox, as you might know, because it's very smooth. It doesn't have, it doesn't hold a lot of pigment, which is a challenge, of course, but it's a challenge that I enjoy. It's just because if it does hold more pigment, it has that tooth, you get those kind of like elephant skin grains on the surface. For me, that just gets in the way of the details and it bothers me. So,
yeah.
So in most recent years, I went back to the Lenox because of its smooth surface. I really, really enjoy that.
Right. And then are you creating the same size piece all the time, or is it always different sizes for each piece that you're making?
Yeah, every piece is a different size. I let the composition and the image kind of dictate the scale and the dimensions of what it should be. So I try and, I'll edit photos first and crop them and, and then figure out how big I think it should be. Usually it always should be bigger than I have space for, but, so sometimes I tame myself, but, like for this most recent show, I had made a bunch of pieces while I was traveling. And so I wanted to be able to work while I was on the road. And so I made a bunch of little pieces, which I hadn't in a very long time. And so that was just a very fun and totally new experience for me. And I'm really happy I did it. And I definitely want to do more. But for me, that's like more details of ice as opposed to trying to fit an entire landscape into a little composition this big.
Right.
Whereas, for the bigger landscapes, I feel like there's such huge, epic landscapes in real life that if I want to do them any justice whatsoever, I have to go as large as I possibly can. So that's one reason why I work on such a big scale, and also to try and, allow viewers to feel like they've been transported there. I think that is the most effective way.
So the large pieces are amazing.
Thank you. They're all cool. I realize I didn't answer your question about the unison color pastels too. I was introduced to them actually by a professor in college as well. And then just stuck with them. I tried other kinds over the years, but they really are my favorite. They're just so velvety and smooth and soft and blend really well. And they're just an amazing, wonderful company that's been willing to work with me over the years to make new colors. And so that's been great. They're pretty much my the only kind of pastels that I use.
Got it. And you do have a question here. Christina's asking how long each piece takes to complete. And I guess it kind of depends on the size that you're doing, but for one of your larger pieces.
Yeah, it really does vary depending on the level of detail, actually, is probably the most important part, but then also the scale. This piece that you can see on the screen now actually took me a year. This is the longest I've ever worked on a piece, but I should say I was working on other things at the same time because I just needed a break because it was so, as I've said, so chocked full of detail that I just, like, my brain couldn't handle it. I needed to take a break. And so it's hard to say, like, I don't know if I'd worked on it straight, how long it actually would have taken. But typically works will take me about, for the larger ones, I would say anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, maybe like 3 months for the really big, like 12-foot ones. So it varies, but that's about it. I'll say 4 to 12 weeks.
And then the second part of this question was, do you make any final touches when it's done to complete it, or is what you do complete when you're finished with your last little section?
Yeah, it's really complete when I'm finished with my last little section. I tend to just finish as I go. I've been trying to retrain my brain lately to not work that way, and just move on when things are kind of good enough, and then go back to them and perfect. But I just tend to, like, when I'm not really paying attention and making myself move on, I just finish. I have to finish every section that I'm working on, and I won't really move on until it looks perfect to me. So by the time, I usually go from top to bottom and left to right, just because I'm a righty and I would smudge stuff if I did it the other way around, and the pastel falls down on the paper. So it's better to go top to bottom. So when I hit that bottom right corner of the piece, it's generally done. I'll step back and like take a look and assess and probably tweak a couple little things. But for the most part, once I've gone over everything, it's finished.
Right. I was going to ask that. Is it, you start in one corner and you're going to work your way over, or is it you start with a detailed section and kind of work your way around the details, but I guess you work in one and move yourself over?
I'm like a typewriter.
So we do have a lot of questions about what you do when you're done with your work. So someone's asking if you use a fixative for your pieces.
Yeah, I kind of stopped. I still have and sometimes use Spectrafix, which is a non-toxic fixative that's made of a cow ingredient. It's casein, and it comes in a little spritz bottle, so it's it's environmental and it's safe to use inside, and it's workable, which is nice. It does spray little dark spots on the piece that sometimes dry and disappear, but if not, you can very easily smudge them away. I think because it's workable, it's nice, but it's also not extremely fixing. But really, no fixative is extremely fixing, especially if you're trying to not mess up the drawing or the colors in any way whatsoever. So really the best thing is I just get them straight to the framer as safely as possible. So the crew will come and build travel frames. They kind of put them in a cardboard box that's deep and cover the top so nothing ever touches the surface of the piece, and it goes straight to the framer and behind glass. And again, the glass isn't even touching the surface of the piece. So once it's really not safe until it's inside the frame. And that would be the case whether I spray or don't. I try to still sometimes spray the really big ones, just because if they have plexiglass, like typically you want to use for the big ones, not real glass, it can bend and touch the piece in the center in transport and then pick up some pastel, and then it's all dirty on the inside and needs to be cleaned when it arrives, which is very expensive. So sometimes I'll spray just kind of like the center area to try and avoid that, but
right,
it's impossible. It's kind of dumb to be working on this scale in soft pastel. I wouldn't recommend it, but I love it.
Sorry, that was like kind of going into our next question, was the framing. So I know you have your pieces framed by Brooklyn Handmade Frames, and we work with them as well. And we actually did a blog with you and with them together, and it kind of talks about how and why you frame your work and how they frame your work. And it's really interesting to hear both sides of it. So as an artist, why would you suggest other artists frame their work? Do you have to for galleries, or is it personal preference?
Oh, not always. No, I mean, it's because soft pastel has to be framed because it's way too vulnerable to not be. I mean, I did earlier on in my career when I couldn't afford the frames, which was for many years, actually, I would just thumbtack my drawings to the wall for exhibitions. And now that thought is just like, gives me a heart attack. But I did it in the gallery, in Chelsea. I had a solo show with just thumbtack drawings on the wall, and it worked. But if anyone has a bag on their shoulder, they turn around by accident, it's like swiped, and there's a big mark on your drawing. So they're really just not safe until they're framed, even if you spray them, no matter how much you spray them. So that's the only reason why I frame. I would not frame otherwise. It's crazy expensive. Oil painters do not have to do that. And I don't love the barrier of the glass between the drawing and the viewer, it's always kind of like a little bit sad for me when I walk into a solo show for the first time, because my work is all, I live with my work as I'm making it, and then it all leaves the studio, and then I don't see it until it's framed and hanging on the wall. And so it's always a little bit sad because there's like this barrier then as they're hung on the gallery wall with the glass. But that said, in most recent years, we have been able to afford in spring for museum glass, which is crazy expensive, but practically invisible. It's really worth the extra money if you can afford it, because you can hardly see it. It just looks like there's nothing there. So that's what we do now, thankfully, just mainly just because the work is selling so well. We know that we'll make it back. But yeah, that's why I frame, and I try to, Paul does an absolutely beautiful job just making the frame kind of disappear. We use white just to keep it super simple and really let the work shine. And so it's not, the frame itself is supposed to just kind of disappear and not be distracting. It's not really meant to be a part of the piece, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And the museum that you were talking about, can you use that on your largest pieces, or it's still too heavy to put in there?
It depends how large, and actually that does sometimes dictate the scale of the work, because you can only get it in sheets that are 70 inches tall, so the work has to be like 68 at most in order to fit the glass. So that's why you'll see a lot of my work is 68 inches tall, and then it can be wide. But yeah, there have been times where I've wanted to go bigger, but I've avoided it just because it really does look so much better with the museum glass. And I'm actually making myself a piece right now for the first time in many years.
Wow.
And I decided to do a diptych instead of one big one because the glass couldn't be that long. And I found a piece that looked really nice actually as two. And so yeah, sometimes that's part of the consideration.
Right. And then this is an interesting question is, do you create series of work, or the question is, do you do series to add context to each piece, or is it something that just evolved?
I think it just evolved naturally, I would say, but yeah, it also gives meaning to a whole, body of work with the specific message behind it. I typically will create a body of work out of, it'll come from one trip that I've taken. So one expedition or one trip. So I'll visit a place and then make a body of work about that place. And that, I don't know, that's just how it's always evolved. I wonder if maybe that came from my mom, because that's what she did with her photography. So it just seems like the natural thing to do, but it also, makes sense to me to have a cohesive conversation and message behind a body of work, and to really get to explore a particular place in as much detail and in as many compositions as I have the time for, because it allows me to really go back and explore the details of that place that I didn't necessarily get to have the time with when I was there in person.
Right. And where can someone find these pieces now?
In person, the best place to go right now is my next solo show, which is just, I keep saying soft opening because there's still two pieces on their way to the gallery that haven't arrived yet, but we've opened the doors because we're just a little bit worried about mayhem around the election and the virus getting worse and more restrictions being put in place. But it is in Seattle at Winston Wachter Fine Art, the gallery that represents me. And they have everything hung except those last two pieces that are going to be there, I think, by the end of October. And you can go, you can make a reservation. So they're allowing just a small number of people at a time to keep everyone super safe. And it's a nice, big, airy, open gallery. So I would go if I could, but I have to get on a plane to get there, which is not the safest. Well, I'm too pregnant right now to fly. So that's really the problem. So please go for me and tag me in pictures and I'll share them. I'm really sad I'm not going to get to see this show in person. That'll be a first for me, but it's all good.
And so if anyone didn't know, Zaria is due in October, you said?
November.
November. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's already October. I'm like, I don't even know what month it is. Yeah, so congrats. So exciting. And
Thank you.
I just want to wrap up with a few more questions that we have here. So someone's asking, do you have any pieces? I know you kind of mentioned this before, but do you have any pieces that you kept, or is this one that you're creating now your first?
Yeah, so I have never, ever kept a drawing of my own. And it's been this hilarious saga for the last few years. There was one piece from actually that you had up a little while ago with me drawing at the bottom. They're like these waves of a glacier. It was from the NASA. Yeah, that one, exactly. Yeah, it's on my homepage. So this drawing I just loved so much. I decided I was going to keep it. And it's very personal too, because it is the glacier, the first glacier I ever saw with my family, with my mom, when we first went to Greenland in 2007. And then I went back 5 years after that trip to spread my mom's ashes in the bay where this glacier calves icebergs per my mother's request. And then 5 years after that was when I made this drawing flying over the glacier with NASA and getting to see it from above. It feels like my mom is kind of a part of that landscape because she's in there. And so it felt really meaningful to me. And I was like, I'm going to keep it. I've never kept a piece before. And then I had a really incredible opportunity to conserve a ton of biodiverse rainforest in Guatemala if I donated a piece. And this was the only one that I had available. And so I said, of course, I'm going to do that. That makes so much sense. And this is a wonderful way to honor my mother. And so I donated the work. And then, it takes time to have the time to make myself something, because I usually have shows on the schedule and not much time to make anything in addition, that's not going to be sold. And so it took another year, and then I made another piece for my Brooklyn apartment, which was all done and framed and ready to be delivered. And then we realized it didn't fit up the stairs.
No. Oh, no.
Gonna fit on the wall. It just wouldn't fit around, the curves of the Brooklyn brownstone stairs.
You were which I had that.
Yeah. And it was like 300 pounds. So there was no way we could like lift it up and maneuver it in other ways to get it. It just was impossible. So now this is like 3 years later, I'm finally working on one that we're going to keep, and we'll see if I get it done before the baby comes. Probably not, but that's okay if it's like halfway done, just so we have something to look at on the walls. It's here in our living room where I'm working on it in a temporary studio anyway. So
right.
That's my long answer to the question.
I'm sure it would be beautiful. So this question is really interesting. Do you feel that pastel captures something different to photography?
Yes, absolutely. Otherwise I wouldn't spend all this time drawing. I wouldn't say that it's better or worse or whatever. There's no, it's just different. My mom was a photographer, and I absolutely love what she did. And I think photography is an incredible medium. It's just not my medium. It's part of my practice. For sure. It is a major step, but for me, I've always just loved pastel. I always loved drawing, and in a way, it's a little bit selfish. I kind of touched on this before. It's like I get to, when I'm traveling and I'm in these places in the landscape and the lights hitting the ice and it just looks stunning. It's like these fleeting moments, and I take a picture and it's just like a second. And I'm also kind of like, with my camera trying to take as many capture it all so that I have everything when I get back to the studio. And then when I get back to the studio, it's like I get to actually finally draw it out, both literally and physically, into many weeks and many details. And I really get to kind of revisit those moments and just meditate on them and in all their detail. And so that's kind of, for me, a little bit selfish, because it's like I get to go back there and just like really, really get intimate with these places and spend the time. And then there's kind of like a nice side effect, which I realized a couple years ago, where I really want people to be immersed in the details of these places that are otherwise so far away and really hard for most of us, or impossible for most of us to actually get to. And there's something about the fact that they're pastel drawings as opposed to a photo. So when someone sees them from far away, they think it's a photo. And then when they hear it's not, they go, oh, and they go right up, right up to the glass and like practically press their nose to look at the details to be like, really? That's not a photo. And so it's like this side effect that just makes you get personal with these places. And
that's probably why you need the glass. Otherwise, everyone would be like touching with their fingers and pastel on their face.
Totally. Yeah.
So I'm going to go through a few rapid questions that I have here also. Do you consider publishing a book for your work?
Yeah, that is something I would love to do at some point. And I've been talking about it with my gallery for a few years now. We just haven't taken the steps to do it, but maybe now is a good time while we can't see the work in person.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me.
How do you control the dust in your workspace?
It's hard. It's one reason why I'm really not so happy or keen on having my studio in my living space, which it is right now. I'm going to be building a separate studio. It's really hard to keep it contained. It does just fall right down, most of it at least. I don't know. There's probably particles in the air too, but I have a big industrial air purifier that I keep running all the time. I wear these like nostril filters that I can change out all the time, although I can't find them on Amazon anymore now, I think because of the pandemic. But so I've just been using the same set, which are probably too dirty by now. But my test is like, as long as my boogers aren't blue, I'm good. So yeah, there are these nostril filters, which is just for me more comfortable than having a face mask because I can use my mouth to blow, stuff away from the paper if I need to. I wear glasses partly to cover my eyes, but also, I can just see the detail better. I wear surgical gloves to keep the pastel from going into my bloodstream, which it would otherwise. And again, I wish I didn't. I much prefer just naked hand, but it's just not good if you're working every day like I am.
Right.
And then I try and vacuum it up like as often as possible, but it plumes when I do that, and I wear a dust mask and I try to just like leave as soon as I'm done so it settles before I get back. And I don't know. That's the best I can do. Those are all my practices, but I really don't know. I do have an autoimmune disease, and maybe it's because of the pastel. I have no idea. Maybe it's hereditary too. My mom did also. So, wow. You never know. There's toxins everywhere in our life, and it's impossible to avoid. But I guess I just do my best.
Right. Are there any artists that you look up to or admire? Anyone that stands out? No.
No. Yes, of course. I mean, my mother probably first and foremost was just a huge inspiration to me and just really instilled in me this love of landscape. And Olafur Eliason is one of my very favorite artists. He does a lot of work surrounding the climate and just, look up his work if you don't know it. It's just incredible. It's more amazing to see in person than it is on a computer probably, but there's a great documentary about him on Netflix that I would recommend. The list goes on. I have lots of artists that I admire.
Too many. So I was just looking because I know we're going to start to wrap things up, and you talked about your show coming up in Seattle. Is there somewhere where people can find more information on it?
Oh, yes. It should
I tried to look on your
right
website here.
Is it on present or future? If not, I need to add it.
I don't think it's there yet. Oh, future. Okay. Solo show. Yes, it is. So right here.
Future. It should be on present right now. I'll move that later. So there's information there, but also I would just call the gallery because you have to make a reservation to go to keep everybody safe. So Winston Wachter Fine Art Seattle. There's one in New York as well. That'll be my next show. I go back and forth between the two. So this one is in Seattle. Where else too? There is also a piece up in the Hamptons in New York. At the what is the hotel called? I'm drawing a blank. Is it on there? It should be on there. Maybe it's
in
not.
New York? No, under Past maybe?
There, it would be under Past actually kind of recently because I had another. Do you see a hotel there? I like it's
the
so
Climate
small.
Museum? No, that's a museum.
No. It should be up towards the top. You don't see anything that's Hampton, New York?
No.
Yeah, I really can't see it. Oh, it wouldn't be under solo. Sorry, it would be under group.
I don't see it, but everyone can, I'm sure everyone knows Zaria's website, zariaforman.com. And also on your Instagram, you post a lot of your work.
Yeah. It is on my Instagram, but the gallery will also have that information because they set up that exhibition. So there's one big piece. It's actually the piece that I had made for myself for Brooklyn that didn't fit up the stairs. That's the one that's hanging.
So sad.
Oh, actually, no, I'm wrong. Sorry, they just switched it out. It's a piece from my NASA show, I think. I'll have to double check if maybe both are there, but it's definitely the NASA piece now. And what else? I think that might be it for public display right now. Yeah.
Is there anything else that we should know about that's coming up or we should be looking out for?
No, I have cleared my schedule for this baby.
So excited.
So that's really it.
Well, congrats again. And thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us, or I know you're super responsive. So reach out to Zaria and we'll answer your questions. I also posted in the chat section, which you can see, there's like a link at the top, and that's just an interview we did. I believe it was last year with Zaria, and you can kind of read more about her work and working on Lenox Paper. And there's also a link on that blog post to the framing blog that we did with you, and also with handmade frames. So that's really interesting too, that you can definitely check out. So is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to do this. It's been lovely.
Yeah, it's fun.